You're listening to another Discovering New Horizons podcast featuring Jim Polikoff. Today's guest for this Body, Mind, Soul episode is Julie Ansis, who will introduce you to the new field of cyber psychology. As always, each podcast episode is a search for the truth and how it applies to our daily lives and well-being. Now, here to take you on this exciting New Horizons journey is our host, Dr. Jim Polikoff.
Yes, this is Dr. Jim Polikoff. And again, thankfully, our numbers continue to increase. So thanks to the thousands of listeners who follow my podcast regularly. Your loyalty is greatly appreciated. So let's get to it. What is technology doing to us? What does it affect? And how does it affect our social interaction, our communication patterns? Even how does it affect our identities? My guest for this episode is Dr. Julie Ansis. She is a professor and director of the Cyber Psychology program at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. Dr. Ansis is also a fellow of the American Psychological Association and a recipient of many honors, including Woman of the Year, bestowed by the APA. She's authored 80 pro publications and 4 terrific books. In this interview, Dr. Ansis will also give us insight into sexism and social media, providing her own interpretation of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case. So we've got some good things in store. Welcome, Dr. Ansis. This is an interview that I've been looking forward to. I'm curious, though, before we really get right into it, how does it feel to be the founding director of the first cyber psychology program in the United States?
Thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm happy to be here. And that's a great question. Well, it's a very exciting feeling. It's, to be one of the first in the United States. I think this is a very forward-thinking program, and it's a very interesting field because it's so interdisciplinary, combining computing, computer science, psychology, communications, media studies, anthropology, sociology.
Oh my God, it's a whole basket full. It's like going through a supermarket.
Yes.
Well, in any case, the interaction of technology and human behavior, at least through the lens of psychology, has exploded. Creating your specialty, cyber psychology, can you define what this means?
Cyber psychology, broadly speaking, refers to the study or the investigation of psychological processes underlying all aspects of technologically oriented behavior. So in short, it's often referred to as the impact of technology on human behavior, but I would add that it also includes the impact of human behavior on technology.
All right, well, good description. Now, you identified 5 major areas which are relevant to your field. Let's go to the internet first, namely online behavior and personality. So you contend the speed and flow of online information has actually galvanized information or actions in such a way, and you use examples like the Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, and the Me Too movement. How so?
Our experience of consuming information, our experience of communicating has drastically changed within the last 20 years or so. And this has led to incredible changes in society, incredible changes for us as individuals. So we have this traditional hierarchical structure, which is completely transformed. So now we could sort of reach somebody by just tweeting about them or reaching them through sort of their LinkedIn profile. And so these hierarchical structures have essentially flattened. Almost anybody now who has access to an internet could speak their piece, could express themselves, express their perspectives and thoughts. We are able now to connect with folks from different continents across the world, really at a moment's notice. And with that, to galvanize group meetings, conversations, thought processes. Our access to information now has expanded exponentially. And so we are able to access all kinds of information just through the internet very quickly. And this has really transformed the ways we sort of experience the world, the ways in which we process information, and the ways in which we interact with each other.
So now I'm curious. There has been so long the importance of the face-to-face interaction with the Me Too movement, which has, oh my God, it spread so quickly. Do you attribute this primarily to the internet and social interaction through online experiences?
If I understand your question correctly, I think yes, many social movements.
But like Me Too, it spread so quickly. How could it have spread that quickly if it wasn't face to face? It had to be online, right?
Right. It couldn't. Now it's so many terms now are worldwide terms, and it doesn't take 20, 30 years for that to happen. It happens in a millisecond, right? So absolutely, I attribute the internet and our experiences with the internet and our access to the internet to our ability to sort of create these mass movements, to even create sort of mass terminology where we all sort of assume, we understand what these words mean.
I think so important. Now, you mentioned people often behave differently in cyberspace versus what they've done offline. Can you explain this?
Well, one aspect of cyberspace is the fact that we can be relatively anonymous. For the most part on cyberspace. We could create characters, we could create avatars, we create personas or profiles of ourselves online, and we could create sort of multiple aspects of ourselves.
Are you saying that may not be the true selves that we're forwarding?
That's a very interesting question, and that's a field of study all in and of itself. I mean, theoretically, we all have various aspects of ourselves, right? The way sort of I behave or interact with my family or friends in private settings may be very different than the way I present sort of professionally. And so the internet allows us to express all these different aspects of self. And also this other layer to do it anonymously, if we want, by creating sort of fake profiles or not even fake profiles per se, but different profiles of ourselves on the internet, and then express ourselves in these different social spaces in various ways, right?
Well, I'm going to get to dating in just a moment because I think that's important. But I think what you're saying is that perhaps we should not trust what we're seeing or hearing online, because someone could create a whole different persona, and that may not be the person we're looking at. Well, selfies, for example. Now, there you can't hide from who you are. Are selfies part of this narcissism that is starting to proliferate because of online interaction?
That's another great question. Another area that a lot of folks have sort of written about. Folks have written about an increase in narcissism in the general population. This focus on self, the lack of or reduced empathy that we have for sort of other human beings. So whether that's part of a societal trend that's now presented on cyberspace, and or cyberspace has sort of created that sort of psychological state that we're in now, is a really good question. Certainly, another aspect of cyberspace is the ability to sort of edit ourselves, right?
Right. Exactly. Through photoshopping type techniques. And today, I mean, how many people would come up to you and say, look, don't I look great today? But they do these selfies saying, don't I look great today? It's the same thing, but now they're more comfortable doing it for some reason.
Yep. And, it is an interesting phenomenon, I think, for folks who are not part of like the Z generation or sort of quote unquote, what's known as digital natives. This whole notion of selfies is very, very new in many respects and very interesting. But as you said, we do have Photoshop. And so we have the ability to increasingly make ourselves, better versions.
Well, not necessarily better, perhaps not realistic versions. Which
Correct.
brings me to online dating. There's obviously an increased trend in online dating. Is this, in your opinion, a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't know if any of these things are necessarily good or bad, right? There's some aspects about our experiences in cyberspace, the way we behave in cyberspace that are quote unquote good, and some that are bad. And it just depends. Like certainly, I would say on the quote unquote good side, we now have access to a multitude of partners. And so you could say that that's a positive thing because, increasingly we'll be able to sort of find folks who sort of fit with us.
You don't need to beat someone in the dark of a bar.
Right, exactly. On the converse, on the opposite of this at the end, and from folks I hear who are single and looking, it's very challenging because now you could just swipe very easily because you have access now to sort of millions of people or thousands of people in your city, whatever it is, or hundreds if you're in a smaller living space. And with that, there's a tendency to say, okay, let me keep looking until I get sort of the perfect mate. And we all know that that's impossible to find, right?
Well, I'm not so sure about that.
Oh, did you find the perfect mate?
Possibly.
Okay,
Yeah.
wow. So there's, it's like, the good and the bad. The anonymity thing is also potentially dangerous. So, for people who are trying to take advantage of others, it's easier to find victims, you could say, in a sense, or be victimized online because you never know for sure who you're communicating with.
And we're not just talking about necessarily physical victimization, but mentally, psychologically, the victimization that goes on there, that's possibly even a greater type of becoming a victim.
Absolutely. And there's some interesting research on that too, that shows that folks who are bullied online or victimized online experience the same sort of responses physiologically as they would if it was happening in a sort of face-to-face interaction. So we get the same physiological responses from being abused or bullied or victimized online as we do in face-to-face interactions.
So why don't we move over to cybersecurity? There's obviously been a huge increase in disinformation. That's what I'm really concerned about, how much disinformation is coming through online. Is there an answer to this? Is there a solution? How do we interpret this accurately?
So it depends. It depends who you ask. I mean, this is something I'm very much concerned with because I think this influx of disinformation and misinformation is leading to very negative societal effects. It's leading to sort of extremes in our thinking, polarized thinking. There is not a lot of room for subtleties in sort of discourse and communication. We also, because of the way the internet is, we also tend to be stuck in our echo chambers, in our bubbles of information. So we're just being fed information that's consistent with our existing interests and likes and preferences. And that is also leading to an inability to be exposed in many ways to alternative ways of thinking. And we know that we need to be exposed to alternative ways of thought and perspective to sort of increase our own critical thinking.
Is there any way we could bring on a magnifying glass? I know this is a parody in a sense, but a magnifying glass that we can say, yes, what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing now is disinformation. Are there any techniques one could use to protect themselves from disinformation?
That's a great question, and it would be a great question for a cyber security expert. But I would say from sort of a psychological perspective that we need to be, all of us, and me included, more critical of what we're viewing online. Number one, we need to consider the source of the information. Not everything online is true, right?
Oh my goodness, I'd never realized that. There is so much of it coming through and you don't know who to believe, but you're right. You certainly can take a look at the mouth that it's coming out of or the eyes that you're seeing and perhaps detect something that might be wrong.
Absolutely. And, it seems obvious, but because we're bombarded with so much information, and it's so easy to find information online that we often don't stop, take a pause, right? Breathe, and say, okay, who is this source? Where is this source coming from? Let me do some research.
Good idea. Good suggestion. So what else should we be concerned about? You mentioned that many social media users are risk takers. Are they in danger of such things as criminal activity? Are we just being too loose about all of this?
Did I say that?
I don't know if you said it, but I'm concerned about it. Perhaps you didn't say that, but I'm saying it. People that seem to be, they really seem to be very loose about the way they use online interaction. And I'm concerned that can lead to criminal activity, things of that nature, putting themselves at risk because they are. So many of them, at least studies, I think, show, are risk takers.
Yeah, well, it is a great concern. Most of us, or a lot of people, don't necessarily pay attention to security settings, right, on their phones or on their computers. They don't necessarily sort of update the software on their computers, on their phones. When they don't do that, they're at risk of identity theft, issues in terms of not being able to protect their privacy and keeping their information private. So this is a real concern.
Well, I would think it's a big problem because even if you have, and people sometimes are lulled to sleep because even if you have something like a LifeLock or a way to protect your identity, if you're clicking on the wrong things and allowing the wrong people in, that doesn't matter. You don't have protection any longer.
Yeah, that's true. And these thieves are folks who exploit that are becoming increasingly sophisticated. So even folks I know who are experts in cybersecurity have found themselves to be sort of victims of this because they get an email, they're asked to click on a link, and it looks so real. It mimics.
Yes, it looks legitimate. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's get into a very sensitive area, Dr. Ancis. There's a huge concern about the menace of cyberbullying. One study reveals that 59% of U.S. teenagers report being bullied online. That's 6 out of 10. Is there any way to reduce or combat cyberbullying?
Yeah. Well, cyberbullying in many ways sort of parallels bullying in face-to-face sort of interaction. So now this is one amazing thing about the internet, or maybe less an amazing thing, is that all our behavior is now online. So the bullying that was occurring in the schoolyard is now occurring in cyberspace.
But there is a big difference, and that is you can hide behind.
Correct.
It's so much easier to bully someone on the internet than it is face-to-face because they can't hit back.
Yeah,
at least
absolutely.
Can't hit back well.
100%. There is that anonymity aspect. And, I haven't been in high school for a while, but I hear about these things from folks who are freshmen and their experiences in high school. And high schools really vary in terms of the degree to which they take these things seriously. Oftentimes, schools are in a bind because they say these types of things are not happening at school. They're happening on the internet or outside of school hours. And we don't even know who, we can't even necessarily prove who the perpetrator
And
is.
high school kids are actually, that's part of high school, is to attempt to determine in life how far you can push the envelope.
Yeah, true. And it's so hard for kids because it's so, even though they may be the victims of these experiences, it's embarrassing. And again, that mimics sort of face-to-face victimization. Oftentimes the victims are the ones who internalize all of this sort of self-hate and negativity and are too embarrassed or afraid to tell other folks in their worlds, So my recommendation would be to parents to try to get an education around various apps, the students or their children's experiences in the world of cyber, which is very hard to do, but to keep the lines of communication open. So when their child is experiencing bullying online, that they're able to come to you and talk about that with you.
I think you're right. I think the key is education. In other words, not to ignore it or not to wonder whether it's happening, but actually have your child understand what's going on and the fact they should come to you when this is happening, because then you could work as a team to combat it.
Yes. And I know that that's, as a mother, I know that that's very challenging too, because children don't always necessarily, they feel that something's icky, right? Or something's wrong, but they're not necessarily able to articulate it or sort of cognitively understand that, whatever their experience is in the world of cyberbullying or cyber victimization is not appropriate.
Well, the parents are the grown-ups in the room, so at least they should try to go make a greater effort to allow themselves to, to let their child know you can come to me and to talk about these things openly. I think that's the problem today with so much going on television-wise, social media-wise. You don't really spend the interaction that oftentimes families used to years ago.
This is very true, which makes me think of some other topics in terms of, us trying to get a handle on our increasing reliance on sort of our phones for alleviating any boredom that we may have, any anxiety we may have, any depression we have. We tend to run to the phone to sort of distract us. And that phone is brought to dinner tables, right? It's brought to the table during breakfast. And with that, there tends to be a minimization of what you just said, the face-to-face interaction, the conversation, the discussion. How's your day? How's it going at school type of thing? How's work going?
Well, there is no phone brought to my dinner table by kids or grandkids. I will tell you that because, we just don't get a chance to talk. And the dinner table is a great time just to sit down and relax and have an exchange of conversation. And that's gone. We're back to TV trays and things of that nature.
Yep. Yeah. So that's wonderful that you do that you implement that in your home.
Well, I think it's important. It's a personal thing, but, sometimes you do have to stand up for things. Another area of social media to touch on is sexism. Now, getting to celebrities, what is your take on the Johnny Depp, Amber Heard situation?
So, well, I wrote I wrote a blog about that on my cyber psychology page.
An excellent blog.
Thank you. So I have a blog on Psychology Today as an expert blogger in the field of cyber psychology. I was motivated to write a piece about what I was seeing with regard to social media in the case of Depp and Heard. I was really struck with the tendency of people to seemingly have a very strong opinion one way or the other about either Johnny Depp or Amber Heard just as a function of sound bites, like on Twitter or on TikTok, without necessarily knowing all the details of their lives. Certainly none of us really know unless you know, unless you're close with them, right?
And from these sound bites, people formed opinions.
Correct.
Without knowing the whole picture.
Correct. And, those sound bites, those photos, those camera angles, social media influencers are very seductive in terms of how they present the information, and are very skilled at presenting information in a way that takes tidbits out of context, takes a look out of context. And then we sort of roll with it, and then we think we know the whole story. So I don't claim to know sort of or understand what happened in their relationship. I wasn't privy to their particular relationship, but I was definitely struck with some of the tweets, the comments, the sort of the TikTok videos that I was seeing, which seemed to really disparage Amber Heard.
Well, exactly. I was going to comment because, as you probably know, I've written, produced, and directed a number of motion pictures. And I have to say that I was very interested in the camera angles and how they were portrayed. Johnny Depp really did get the better of imagery. No question about that. And I think, obviously, that just backs up exactly what you said.
Interesting. Yes. That and sort of every behavior that was shown online, and it was just a split second, again, was sort of taken out of context, or there was an interpretation of, if any of whether it was the lawyers or the defendant, the prosecution were taking a drink of water, or, blowing their nose. There was an interpretation of that, and that just went, sped out of control and went viral.
And you have major celebrities, so everyone tunes in because they are celebrities. So if you're a celebrity, hire an attorney who is very skilled in social media, I think, right?
Yeah, that would probably be a good bet. So, I mean, in terms of sexism, I was seeing sort of these extremes with sort of Amber Heard presented as this sort of wicked liar and just an overall bad person, contrasted with the attorney for Johnny Depp, who was obviously very skilled and smart attorney. But again, she was sort of idolized without us really knowing anything about her personal life. What a wonderful person. I mean, she was, bottom line, getting paid to represent her client. And she did a great job. And there may be nothing beyond that. But we tended to sort of make interpretations that there was a love affair, or what a fabulous person the attorney was, in contrast to Amber Heard, without any real basis.
Well, this leads me to my next question. As a society, we continue to face the challenges of alcohol and drug addiction. But now we've reached a new stage of what should be termed, I believe, internet addiction.
So, that's an area of some controversy, with some researchers saying there's definitely thousands, if not millions of people who are addicted to the internet, and other researchers saying, well, maybe sort of, no, not so much. If you look at sort of standard definitions of addiction, you could potentially say, yes, many of us are in fact addicted to the internet, that we have trouble separating from it, that we have a lot of anxiety, say our phone is lost or missing, or we're not able to access our phone, that oftentimes it interferes with our everyday sort of life, our socializing, sometimes our work, sometimes our personal relationships, that we often get dopamine hits neurologically.
Dopamine, good term.
Yeah. So from all of the likes or reshares or retweets.
And we depend on those likes, don't we? And if we don't see those likes, it becomes to take a toll on us. Oh my God, what did I say or didn't say that apparently they didn't like this? And sometimes you get a lot of likes, which obviously ingratiates your attitude towards yourself. But in any case, I think you make a very good point. I'll ask you this, though, talking about addiction, because there's another side of this coin. Dr. Ansys, yet women, and I believe this is in a study that you had mentioned, women who share pictures on their mobile phones send more emails, more frequently use Twitter, and they're said to have this actually enable to lower their stress. But isn't this a contradiction to addiction?
Well, that was a study that I didn't do, but it was part of a review of studies in one of my articles. We could use the internet for all kinds of reasons, good reasons, bad reasons, neutral reasons, right? So, folks who are using it sort of to socialize, many folks use Facebook because they want to connect with sort of family and friends who don't live in the same city. So they're sharing pictures.
Very legitimate reason.
Children, right? And their grandchildren. You could find sources of support online that you may not have sort of locally. You may be in a remote area of the world. And so this gives you access to socialization, access to entertainment, access to information that you may not necessarily have in your local kind of environments. At the other end, you could spend an inordinate amount of time just scrolling through your feed, which becomes very mind numbing. And many people use that sort of.
And I've seen people sit and scroll for, God, a good hour or so, just going through every single thing. And it does have to be mind-boggling in a sense, because, you're now taken from reality, obviously, of the world around you into the reality of your phone or mobile tablet.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so many of us are, guilty of that, because it's sort of becomes this kind of relaxing behavior. Mm-hmm. If you have a very difficult, challenging day, and at the end of the day, it's very easy to just pick up the phone and just scroll and, numb yourself out and entertain yourself in a variety of ways.
So I think, Dr. Ansys, what you're saying is that there's a good and bad to it. It's a great way to communicate with each other, but it can be overdone, correct?
Yeah, I think it depends on the user, like how the user is actually using this technology. That's what it boils down to. The rub there is that so much of this is really addictive, right? In a lot of ways. And there are researchers who will just cringe at that word, who don't believe that there's such a thing as internet addiction necessarily. But so much of this sort of feeds our sense of self-worth, as you mentioned. Am I getting likes? Am I getting retweets? Am I even, besides being liked or not liked, am I even relevant? How
Right.
is it that so-and-so just got sort of 40,000 likes and I only got, 2?
Right. Well, I think what you're saying is, if someone is having too much alcohol or too much of a use of drugs, they can say, well, it's due to the drugs, due to the alcohol. But I don't think people think about the fact they may be becoming addicted to the internet. You make a very good point. I want to get into video games as we are running down in time here. Over 164 million Americans play video games. Is it true that gaming professionals, or I should say gaming provides social interaction and actually reduces depression? That's one part of the study. But then I'm concerned about the violence in video games and if there's any relationship to mass shootings and growing aggressive behavior on the part of people.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I should have broken it up in two questions, but I couldn't resist. I really see one tied into the other.
So, Yeah, I mean, there's incredible benefits to multiplayer games, engaging in video games in terms of the social aspect, in terms of the educational aspect, in terms of entertainment aspect. And again, it really depends on the content. What type of video games are we talking about? Like, number one, and as you mentioned, there are violent, destructive video games. So one could argue that are not healthy for anybody. Other folks would argue it's a way of expressing themselves and getting out their aggression through this video game, and it doesn't necessarily translate to
kill someone on the internet and that's not a real person you've killed.
Yeah, exactly right. So folks have written about the relationship between violent video games and behavior, just like they wrote about violent TV shows, and violent movies, and whether that had an effect on children and grown adults. So that research is not quite clear. There certainly seems to be a relationship between engaging and viewing violent video games and sort of violent attitudes and or thoughts. Whether it translates into actual behavior that's violent is questionable. And you may say, well, these mass shooters that we know about were watching violent video games. But was it the video games or was it the psychological profile?
Or was it a combination? I really think more studies need to be done into this area. And let's face it, mass shooters, people who are murdered, I mean, they are, I think there is some data on the fact that these people do, they're into the internet so much, and that's what's, more or less forming their different behaviors. So you would think that we'd be doing more studies on that. That's where, perhaps even the government should be involved in a little bit more of that, but, preaching to the choir. In any case, quick question about cyber therapy. I just am curious about this because I know that more and more psychologists are involved in treating their patients via cyber therapy through the internet or even through their phone. I mean, it's a lot easier this way. You can do FaceTime if you're not able to get into a doctor's office. And by the same token, doctors can see more patients this way. But is it as effective, in your opinion, as face-to-face therapy?
So, I mean, research on this indicates that it is as effective as face-to-face. Teletherapy is as effective. In addition, you have now a variety of apps on our phones that we could access to help with anxiety, to help with depression. You have the use of virtual agents, virtual reality to help with a range of issues and problems, including work with populations like veterans who've been experiencing PTSD as a function of their roles and a function of their service, who sometimes express that they feel more comfortable talking to a virtual agent who's programmed as opposed to a sort of a real live human being.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's really fascinating.
Maybe they're more relaxed in their own home environment.
That could be. Or, maybe feel, it's hard to hypothesize, but maybe feel that they won't be as judged by sort of a virtual agent. And so it's a sort of a human being that's simulated in many respects, but not really a human being. Also, folks who have difficulty, children with autism, sometimes respond more effectively to a robot than to a real live human being, and then are taught an incredible number of social skills by engaging with this robot. So there's so much potential, and the fact that many people who are living in rural environments are able to access help, therapy, counseling through the internet is really wonderful. But, the jury's still out in terms of, many aspects. What are we missing when we're not sort of, all things being equal, when we're not together?
Face to face, right. That was my question, but I think you've given us a good food for thought and a lot of validity to it, which makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about it. Mm-hmm. But, it's the old adage, time flies when you're having a great time. And this has been a good interview. I want to end with the future. And I guess it's the present future, actually. Terms: AI, artificial intelligence; VR, virtual reality; VE, virtual environment. What does this all mean in the realm of cyber psychology?
That's a great question. Maybe I should write an article with you about it. It would be a wonderful piece. Well, it's not going anywhere. That's for sure. I think it'll continue to increase. It will continue to proliferate. Technology is becoming increasingly more sophisticated. Increasingly, and we all know that if we want to function in this world now, for better or worse, we need to get on board, right? We need to sort of understand how this is all working. And I think this is going to involve the confluence of computer scientists, psychologists, ethicists, working together to really develop not only, improvements in technology, but also consideration to sort of the ethical implications for human beings. And back to your previous question, to really understand, okay, what's missing here that we're not getting in face-to-face, and how could we sort of improve upon the technology as well. So it's not going anywhere. I think it's here to stay and going to become increasingly more sophisticated. And
there's more research that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Ansys, it's really been a pleasure. I believe we've just barely scratched the surface. There's so much to talk about. And if you're open to it, when there's some more studies are available, more insight, we'd love to have you back and do another podcast, because you're just a wealth of information, and we've got a whole new field here, cyber psychology. By the way, in any case, on our website, our listeners go there all the time, and they're going to be able to access your article on the subject of, your Psychology Today, which publishes your dissertation about cyber psychology. So we'll be sure that they have a link to get there. We'll also include your LinkedIn page, if you don't mind, so people can learn more about you, and also include your Twitter page, if you don't mind, about getting a bunch of tweets, people who may have questions. So we're going to include all of that in our website, so our listeners can readily go there and find out information about you, because you have such a great background. I mean, my God, Woman of the Year, you deserve every bit of that. So once again, thank you, Dr. Ansys.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you today.
You can discover more information about our guest, Dr. Julie Ansys, her activities, and the innovative field of cyber psychology by visiting our website, jamespolikoff.com. That's James, POLAKOF.com, jamespolikoff.com. You'll also discover a variety of valuable resources on our website and other terrific Body, Mind, Soul podcast episodes. Again, jamespolikoff.com. Now back to Dr. Jim.
Our production coordinator, Faith Michelle, is absolutely correct. Our Discovering New Horizons website contains an amazing amount of valuable information and resources. And we also have a number of other great body, mind, soul podcasts that you might be interested in and should perhaps listen to. Keep those emails and suggestions coming. We really appreciate that, because it gives us insight of things you might be interested in having us cover. As you know, we cover a wide variety, so don't be ashamed of saying, well, can you do this? We'd be interested in this particular topic. Keep those emails coming, the comments posted on our website. And again, we invite you to visit jamespolikoff.com. This is Dr. Jim Polikoff. I thank you for listening.